Newsfirst, Newsline.
Hello there, a very good evening. Welcome to another edition of Newsline Live. Of course, today we're joining you right after the President's address to the nation. Unfortunately, since we were preparing for the program, we couldn't really sit down and watch the entire address of the President. However, we will not be discussing the statements made by the President, of course, because we are still to hear from him, because we were preparing for the show, obviously. But we have a brilliant discussion lined up for you today here. State-owned enterprises, they've caused much losses to Sri Lanka. And there was a time when the popular opinion in Sri Lanka was we need to protect state-owned enterprises from privatization. But now, with the times changing and Sri Lanka going bankrupt, the sentiments seem to have changed. People are either in favor of privatization, or some sets of society are disinterested completely. So what really happened here, and what really is the right way forward? To discuss these matters and more, we've got with us here today Mr. Mahendra Jayasekera. He is the chairman of the Colombo YMBA, also into the corporate sector. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us on the program this evening. So let's start off with state-owned enterprises, lining up the things that we know. They've cost us an amazing amount of money, money that could have saved us from this economic crisis. Some even blame the mismanagement of SOEs almost entirely on this economic crisis that we're facing here today. So, if not privatization, then what?
Yeah, actually, Shalan, when you talk about SOEs or state-owned enterprises, now, okay, of course, we talk about privatization. But I think if we talk about privatization of SEs, then we are restricting our discussion. How I want to define SOEs is when it comes to restructuring. You spoke about the country going bankrupt and the reasons for that, right? Being SOEs being badly managed. But when we look at SOEs, my definition of SOE is any public institution is a SOE. The government, it could be a government department, it could be a ministry, right? Or any other institution. It could be an institution that is providing goods and services like water or electricity.
So you're moving away from the traditional definition of a state-owned enterprise. So for you, a ministry, a department, an authority is an SOE.
Even judiciary.
Okay.
Those are also state-owned enterprises, really. So what I am saying is any public institution that is not delivering or achieving the purpose for which it has been set up has to be restructured. Right? So it is not limited to privatization. I mean, ministries cannot be privatized, but should be restructured. Right? So it could be, when we talk about other commercial type of enterprises like CEB or water or Sri Lankan Airlines or whatever, then there are different models you can use. It could be privatization, it could be public-private partnerships, it could be management agreements where you invite private parties to come and manage institutions for us. But if you look at the overall economic benefit of SOEs, then we should not be only limiting ourselves to talking about privatization of commercially run SOEs. That is where the problem is, because when people see the government or anybody else coming and talking about the need to privatize SOEs, people know that there are a whole lot of other SOEs that are inefficient, that are not achieving the purpose for which they have been set up. So how about them? Without doing anything to make them efficient, you are trying to privatize certain other institutions.
Certain institutions that have been incurring massive losses.
Massive losses. Actually, these losses we can see, but say, for example, the amount of money, right, the government or the public, as a nation we are using through other ministries, departments, we don't know. We don't know. So that is why we need to look at this as a whole. And
because since they are not traditional SOEs, they don't really count as losses.
Yes, exactly.
So my question to you is now, let's speak about, textbook defined SOEs, the SOEs that can incur losses.
Right.
So when the government says, or when the people say we need to protect the SOEs, these need to stay with the people, what they means is it needs to be in the possession of the government, it should not be private. But what if someone says that, hey, look here, for these SOEs to truly be with the people, that can only happen if it's listed on the Colombo Stock Exchange, where people can go buy shares. Then it will really be owned by the people instead of just a few government cronies who are being appointed to chairmanships and then whatnot. So isn't that a better way to look at all of this when speaking about privatization?
Certainly it's a better way to look at it. Certainly it's a better way to look at it, because we need to see now we are referring to these as national assets. Now that's a term we are using.
We need to protect national assets.
We have got stuck in that word really. In that terminology, we are stuck in that terminology. Something becomes an asset only if it is giving a return, if it is adding value. If you have a child, right, if that child is adding value to your family, then that child is an asset. If that child is destroying your wealth, the family name and everything, then that child is a liability. Right? So like that, these institutions, we have to see whether they are adding value to the society, adding value to the people, adding value to improve the standard of living of our people. If they are not adding value, if they are destroying value, then we need to do something about it. Because if an institution is providing a good service at a reasonable cost, it doesn't matter who owns them. It doesn't matter. Now say, for example, you go and buy a product, right, of a shelf in a supermarket, right? As long as the product is good and the price is right, you don't worry who owns that company that is producing that product. So it's like that. Actually, these national assets remain with the people, right? Remain with the people, and they are providing a service to the people. That is how we need to look at it. We should not get stuck in this word that these are national assets we need to protect. These are just buzzwords, really. These buzzwords are created by the people who have vested interest in these institutions, who don't want these institutions restructured, who don't want these institutions
actually vested with the people.
Exactly, being vested with the people. That is what is happening. So we have to take our people out of this mindset and educate them to add value to the society, to the country, to the people. We need to restructure these enterprises. This is fundamental.
But Mr. Jayasekera, now take a look at the situation in the country right now, where we're a bankrupt nation. We're looking towards, coming out of this rut. So far, we've done okay, at least. Inflation is coming down. We are going ahead with the restructuring. We received the support of the IMF, but the battle is far from being won.
Yeah.
And already, at this very early stage of our progression towards a more developed society, a better nation for us as well as future generations here in Sri Lanka, we can see the mistakes of the past repeating themselves. We, of course, don't dedicate too much airtime on our programs for, matters that are not really in the interest of the people or don't really help our country progress forward towards where we want to go. But you can see the amount of distractions that are being brought up these days. I'm pretty sure you know, Mr. Jayasekera, what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure our audience too knows what I am referring to. We see this continuing trend. I mean, there was a dying down of these tactics during the time of the Aragalaya, when people were really thinking about what we have been doing so far as a country, the leaders that we've been appointing to rule our country, and all of those revolutions were taking place here in the Sri Lanka, almost an intellectual revolution. During that time, all of these died down.
Yeah.
There was not a single whisper, a single hum.
Yes.
But now, when we are starting to, crawl back up to our feet again, these come about.
Yeah.
And so how do you think we should progress or move forward from this? Because it doesn't seem like we have learned from the mistakes of our past.
See, actually, yes, these are diversionary tactics, right, by interested parties. But what we need to do, what we need to understand is, Shalan, the government should come up with a, very straightforward, convincing program to convince people this is our roadmap, right? Now, are we seeing a roadmap like that? I am not seeing a roadmap like that.
But
that
the President just made a statement. Maybe he defined the roadmap there?
No, actually, I could not listen to his speech, honestly. But so far, we haven't really seen a roadmap. Actually, when I talk about a roadmap, what I refer to is this. See, if you are running a company, now I am running a company, right? For the company, we have a roadmap in terms of outcomes. what should be my sales, what should be my market share, what should be my brand value, right? What should be my share price. So like that, there should be defined outcomes, right? So like that, the government also should have defined outcomes for key sectors, right? Say for example, education. What are our outcomes really? How many students, right? How many students should get through O levels? How many students should get through science, maths, English? How many should get to A levels? How many should go to the universities in the streams of maybe engineering, medicine, architecture, accountancy, or whatever really, right? We should have national outcomes like that. I am not seeing any national outcomes like that. Health sector, what are the national outcomes? Now say for example, if you go to Singapore Ministry of Education outcomes, right? Primary education first outcome is the child should be able to distinguish right from wrong. Secondary education first outcome is child should understand what moral integrity is. Tertiary education first outcome is the student should be able to stand up for what is right.
So these are among other outcomes.
Among other outcomes. So see how they have lined up the outcomes really. They are outcomes. So like that, in Sri Lanka, we don't have outcomes. We have to define these outcomes. And if you tell the people, these are our outcomes, these what we are driving for, then people will understand. Then these diversionary tactics are not needed. People will not be able to use diversionary tactics. Now say for example, tourism. Do we have outcomes? What is the real target? Right? Are we talking of 20 million tourists for Sri Lanka? Malaysia today is talking of 29 million tourists arrived, more than their population. What is our outcome? What is our outcome in terms of per capita tourist spending? Do we have outcome? We don't have. What should be our rank? Do we have outcome as a tourist destination in the world? Right? In a rank. There is nothing like that.
Mr. Jayasekera, you're mentioning quite a lot of areas and quite a lot of reforms, because we've been, well, I don't really know what we've been doing as Sri Lankans for so long, but now that we find ourselves at the depth of this very, very dark place right now, we're looking to move forward. But do you really think that all of these can be looked at and restructured across the board all at once?
No, it's like this. All at once in the sense, see, there are different people in charge of these sectors, right? Tourism, there is a person in charge of that sector. Education, there is a person in charge of that sector.
Sometimes right? more than the number of people needed.
More than the number of people needed. But there is someone responsible for it, right? So you have to give them targets, no? You have to give them target. Okay, I am giving you, hey, Mr. Minister of Education, I am giving you 350 billion rupees this year for education. These are the outcomes I need, right? Hey, say health. Ministry of Health. I tell you have to tell the Minister of Health, hey, Mr. Minister of Health, I am giving you so much money. These are the outcomes I need. So like that, you have to define outcomes, and then people will see. Look, there is a set program. These are outcomes. Like India, Chalan. If you go to India, man on the payment knows India's 2030 outcome. What they are driving for is the third largest economy by 2030. Everybody is geared to achieve that. So like that, we have to get the people together to go for an outcome. Then only people will have confidence in the economy as well as the leadership. Look, we are going somewhere. Without that, without showing an outcome, if we talk about just reforms, people don't understand what these reforms are.
And
what are the outcomes?
And for people to
what
have
are we getting out of this?
Confidence in the outcomes, or confidence in the economy, confidence in the government. Transparency is also very important, and that's something that we see is really, really lacking in Sri Lanka. We spoke of the public sector, but we'll cross over to a short commercial break, and on the other side we'll look at what the private sector can really do in bringing Sri Lanka out from this rut towards prosperity, and as the President says, hopefully by 2048. Stay tuned. You're watching Newsline live.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
CBSL reduces policy interest rates. Inflation to drop to single digits by the end of July. Pay tax to be amended by the end of the second half. Rupee continues to strengthen. Fuel prices reduced. Fuel queues in several areas. Minister says no fuel shortage and vows to cancel permits of petrol sheds that fail to maintain minimum stocks. Another spillage from the Express Pearl. Area fishermen allege. MIPA says there is nothing to worry. However, investigations are ongoing. General Shavendra Silva sends a letter of demand to parliamentarian Vimal Veeravansa. Social activist Bruno Divakara remanded for a week. Protests surface against the draconian broadcasting bill.
When a heart attack strikes, every minute makes the difference between life and death. With the right care and treatment at the hand of the most skilled surgeons and medical professionals. With the perfect environment for recovery. Durden's Heart Centre, dedicated to you.
Newsfirst, Newsline.
Hello there, welcome back. You're watching Newsline Live. We're continuing our discussion with Mr. Jayasekera. Mr. Jayasekera, we were speaking about the public sector, SOEs, and how that has really resulted in Sri Lanka being a bankrupt nation right now and where we are as a country today. But also, let's not forget that there is a private sector in Sri Lanka as well. And the private sector can also contribute to development. The private sector also, in certain ways, contributed to our downfall as well, in certain instances. So let's speak a bit about the private sector and the contribution that the private sector can give towards economic development here in the country.
Yeah. So actually, private sector is the engine of growth, right? The government's business should be not to do business and allow the private sector to do business.
The popular saying is government has no business being in business.
Being in business. But for the private sector to do the job, Shalan, what has to happen is there should be economic freedom in the country. If there is no economic freedom, you can't expect much from the private sector.
Right.
Right. I mean, if you see what the economic freedom is, economic freedom index, the construct of the economic freedom index, the rule of law, regulatory effectiveness, market openness, like that, right? Regulatory effectiveness, market openness, trade openness. So like that, there. I mean, if you dissect the economic freedom, those are the things you come out with, right? So if there is no economic freedom in the country, if our economic freedom ranking is low, that means the private sector cannot grow. It is not, I mean, the environment is not conducive for the growth of private enterprise. Right? So that is a primary problem we have. That is why you see lots of corporates, even local entrepreneurs moving out of Sri Lanka. Existing private sector is also shrinking. They are struggling to do business. So what we need to understand is unless we establish ease of doing business, unless we improve economic freedom in the country, private sector will struggle, and we will not be able to expect much from the private sector to do for the country's economic growth. That is what we need to understand. Otherwise, there is no point just bashing the private sector, because their hands are tied. Because I am also in the private sector. One clear example is this. Say, for example, we are always telling the private sector should be more efficient. Right? Now, that's a buzzword, no? Right? Efficiency. We should cut cost and things like that. But if you really see, Shalan, in companies, I would think about 70% of cost are not within the control of the companies. Right? Only 30% of the cost, right, is within the control of a company. 70% of the cost come from electricity, fuel, right, cost of material in terms of exchange rate, right, social infrastructure, like, education providing skilled labor, right, competency of people, then health sector ensuring that people are healthy. Right. So like that, there are lots of other issues that are associated with the 70% of the cost. If you And we know that the 70% cost cannot be managed by the private sector. The 70% of the cost is managed by people, in my opinion, who have very little idea of managing cost. Right? Only 30% of the cost can be managed by the companies themselves. So you try to make that 30% efficient by cutting maybe 10% of it down or whatever. You still have 27%, overall 3% cut. So that will not make the private sector efficient. So that is why we need to look at the overall cost management in the economy so that the private sector can competitively participate in the economic activities. But that is my view really. Otherwise you can't expect.
Speaking about the private sector, there are those who say that you call for an equal playing field, competitiveness, promote competitiveness, transparency and all that. But there are certain cooperations, even in the past here in Sri Lanka, that have colluded with certain governments, certain government officials, sometimes even the highest ranking government official in the country, in securing massive profits for themselves.
Yeah.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but there could be people in Sri Lanka who have a little bit of a negative view, even about the private sector, in saying that it's large corporations, large companies that fund several politicians, and then once they are settled in power, give them a call back for favors.
Yeah. What you are saying is absolutely right. We need to understand why they collude. Why do they collude, Shalan? Because there is no economic freedom for them to operate without colluding.
So you're saying that
right?
If there was freedom, they wouldn't collude?
No. There would be less instances. There will be collusion. That you can't stop, right? Private sector will always try to collude. I mean, they will try to do deals. But if there is economic freedom and if there is rule of law in the country, government integrity, then opportunities for that collusion will be limited. That is how you create a competitive environment. Actually, that is the very reason why there is very little entrepreneurship development in the country. Because entrepreneurs cannot come up because there is no economic freedom. Right? As you say, if other companies or if other corporates are colluding with the government and the politicians to do business, then how can a startup entrepreneur ever think of coming to private sector to do business? That is exactly why these young entrepreneurs are leaving the country. What you are saying is absolutely right. I 100% agree with you. Because there are corporates, basically they use their connections with the politicians and the government to do business. You can't deny that. That is true. Actually, in economies like this, right, where there is where rule of law is not effective, right, the government integrity is at a low level, in the corruption index when we are at a lower level, people tend to do these things to make money. That's all. It's very simple. Unless you fix that, you can't expect the private sector to have a clean hand and operate, because you can't operate.
So basically you're saying that the private sector corporations cannot exist without colluding in an environment like this.
Yeah, exactly. That is to a large degree, that is what I'm saying really. That is why they are forced to do that. Otherwise you can't say people are dishonest by nature. No. Actually you push people to being dishonest. That is the problem really.
So, Mr. Jayasekera, one final question now. You're a top official in the private sector. What do you see for Sri Lanka in the coming years based on our trajectory right now? In a few minutes. We've got
in a few minutes, Shalan. Actually, I am only cautiously optimistic about what we can achieve. Right? Now, say for example, if you take the IMF report, we are talking about the IMF program, right? IMF report, if you see 2028 projections for Sri Lanka GDP growth is 3%, right? Total foreign debt, right? Today 59 billion, IMF projection in 2028 is 69 billion, 10 billion increase in foreign debt, right? Trade deficit today it is 7 billion minus, 2028 8 billion minus, 7.8 billion minus. So can you run a company like that? If the company is bankrupt, I come and tell you, you are my chairman, my sales will grow 3% in 5 years. My total debt will go from 59 to 69 billion, 10 billion increase, and my loss will increase. What will you tell me?
Pack your bags and get home.
Yeah, so I don't want to say that. So, but that's what you would tell me. And say, for example, more than that, I mean, if you take the IMF report, IMF projection for the exchange rate in 2028 is 512 rupees. So when you say that, I mean, you have to do a small mathematical calculation. They haven't put 513 as a number. But if you do a mathematical calculation and divide the total rupee GDP by dollar GDP, you get a figure of 512. So when IMF is projecting like, I am sure we can do much better than that. We can do much better. We have resources to do much better. It's just that, as I said, we have to define our outcomes, what exactly we are going to do, and gear the nation to achieve that. If we do that, Sri Lanka will have a much better future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahendra Jayasekera. Of course, Sri Lanka has already been doing better. I think we were expected to get single-digit inflation in about a year's time. We've started that a year earlier, so good signs at least.
Yeah.
You said you're cautiously optimistic, so I'll take a different approach and say I'm really optimistic, because if there is no hope for Sri Lanka, then there is very little hope for us as citizens of this country that we all share and love. Thank you very much for watching Newsline. We'll meet you with the news at 9 on TV1. Stay tuned. Thank you very much for watching. Take care and God bless.